Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in.
Welcome into another episode of the podcast, everybody. I'm excited to be here with you again today. And today's episode is sort of like a little um, calling you out, even though I don't know if you need to be called out or not. So there's people out there listening to this who do need this call out. And you're going to see in my confession that that applies to our family as well, not just yours. Because what we're going to talk about is um you know, these little tells, and as a coach, I tune into what my clients are saying. And every once in a while, actually, I shouldn't even say every once in a while, frequently during coaching calls, my clients will say something that's I consider it a little tell or a little reveal of like, oh, okay, this is the thought process that's present inside this person's mind. And this is one of those tells. And it's the idea of disciplining our kids when their misbehavior isn't their fault. And I hear this from clients a lot. And the example, I'm going to give you a confession from my real life. But first, I'm going to start with an example that is like the classic example of this. And that is when new siblings come into a family. So, let's say you have like a 3-year-old or something like that, and you just had a baby. Most people, even without working with a coach or something like that, most people are kind of aware that it's pretty common and normal for that older sibling to sort of regress in their behavior when baby brother or baby sister comes home. And we kind of just know that that happens. And I've talked in the past about why that happens. Um, but what happens a lot in families when that goes on, when we see that regression, is the parents saying things like, well, it's not their fault that they're, throwing more tantrums than usual. It's because of the new baby, or it's not their fault that they, you know, threw all their dinner on the floor. It's because of the new baby. It's not their fault that they're throwing their toys around their bedroom and not cleaning up after themselves. It's because of the new baby. Everything's topsy turvy because of the new baby. And so it's not their fault that they're misbehaving. And to that logic, I want to say, you're absolutely right. It is not this kiddo's fault. It is because of the new baby. That is 100% true. But the fact that fault even matters to us shows this thought process of discipline is about punishing the person who is to blame. And that is a way that we have thought about discipline for a very, very long time. And I'm going to explain what I mean. You might be like, well, that's what that really means. And that's okay. As I keep talking today, I think you're going to see where I'm coming from this. But like I said, I promised you a confession. So let me rewind and let's talk about what is an example in my very life today that shows that that default thinking of discipline as punishment, it is deep. It is this kind of like sinister default thinking that can pop up in everybody. So a couple days ago, uh my daughter, not a couple days ago, a couple weeks ago, my daughter started, she's kind of like getting more and more in with this group of friends that she really likes. And it's a great group of friends. There's nothing wrong with it at all. But she has a curfew. Her curfew is 10:30. She's a sophomore in high school, just for a frame of reference. Not saying that anybody else have the same curfew as we do at all. But her curfew is 10:30. And the more that she's gotten super pumped and excited about this friend group, the more that she has pushed the envelope with her curfew. She has like texted us like 2 minutes before curfew to say, oh, I'm running late. Is it okay if I stay out an extra half hour? Or we're watching a movie. Can I come home when it's done? Or whatever. And like kind of gotten dispensation. She also has just straight up come home after curfew and all of these things. And this morning, after it happened again last night, my husband and I had a conversation saying, okay, enough is enough. We need to do something. And I think she needs a consequence, which is to, have an earlier curfew until she can, you know, until she can, recoup the amount of time that she has missed of being in this house by being late for curfew. She needs to have an earlier curfew. And, during that conversation, I tried to think about it from the lens of like what would be an impactful experience for Gigi. So I suggested that her um curfew until further notice should be 9:30. It's an hour difference. It's a big difference, and I think that that would be really impactful for Gigi. My husband was thinking about it in terms of, well, what does she deserve? What does she um what would be fair, and what seems like not too harsh of an experience for her. And so he suggested 30 minutes earlier. Now obviously this is not the world's biggest disagreement in a marriage, 30 minutes versus an hour. That's not the point. The point is how the two of us were thinking about this. For my husband, he was thinking like, well, this transgression wasn't that bad. And she has been kind of communicative and blah, 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 blah. He was really looking at it through the lens of blame and sort of like what is the punishment and it needs to fit the crime and et cetera, et cetera. He's really looking at it through the lens of punishment. And I was looking at it through the lens of what is going to actually mean something to our kid. And it's not really about if she's good or bad, or if it's her fault or her friend's faults that she keeps missing curfew or any of that stuff. It's just about when we make this decision, this is the outcome that we have. And if we look at it through the lens of like, well, it's not really Gigi's fault. Like her friends keep starting movies really late in the evening, or they go out to get Cane's chicken at, 10:15. And so it's not Gigi's fault. She's just with these group of people and this stuff keeps happening to her. Well, that might be very true. And it's absolutely probably is true, at least half the time, but it's irrelevant. And when I look at this through the lens of that reveal of like, oh, okay, so no matter how much work that may have done on ourselves, my husband and I, around seeing discipline as simply a container that teaches lessons, underneath all of that self-improvement, there's still that like bedrock layer that's like about who's to blame and who needs to be punished and who's at fault here, and don't punish somebody for something that somebody else did, blah, 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 blah. But if we're able to look at discipline through the lens that it is non-punitive, that it is simply the logical outcome, Gigi needs to learn that she needs to manage her time with with her friends. She may learn that. She may not learn that. It might take her many, many years to learn that. I don't need to have a dog in that race. And in fact, it's really a bad idea for me to have a dog in that race. But my thing is not about punishing her. It's not about telling her that she's bad or that it's her fault that all of this stuff happened. It's just the logical outcome is if you miss curfew, your curfew is earlier. That's just how it works. And over time, you get to make the decision if you want to be more mindful of time, to say no to your friends at 10:15 and ask them to drop you off before they go to Cane's, or to tell everyone we could start a movie right now if you want to, but I will leave halfway through the movie. Or if you guys can't drive me home at that time, then I might need a ride now, et cetera, et cetera. Getting your ducks in a row and managing your time. These are things that Gigi will choose or not choose when it makes sense to her to choose them. And if her curfew is all over the place and pretty wishy-washy, there's really no need for her to learn that lesson at all. And there's no downside to her being totally disconnected from her time management. So let's really think about this idea of like it's not the kiddo's fault. As soon as we're talking about fault, we are distracting ourselves from what's really important. And I also think that as we do our own personal work and as we kind of get more and more self actualized ourselves, we start to realize that blame and fault and finger pointing and punishing and all of these things, it's just, I mean, to be honest, it's beneath us and it's beside the point. It's irrelevant. The situation is what the situation is. And I think it's an adult way to look at things, whether it's about our kids or not. The situation is what it is. Having a backward gaze as to whose fault it is that the situation is what it is really a distraction. It Nothing can change the fact that my daughter came home late for her curfew yesterday, whatever the reasons may have been. And so trying to reverse engineer a situation by blaming people and punishing them is it's really not a very evolved way of thinking about relationships or learning or circumstances or cause and effect or, you know, choices and outcomes. Like it's just a very, very sort of childish way to think about things. So in terms of like that tell in a session with a client, as soon as I hear someone saying, well, it's not their fault, or it doesn't seem fair to punish my kid for something that another kid did, blah, blah, blah. My response to that always is like, I agree. I don't want you punishing your kid ever, whether it's for something another kid did or for something that your kid did. We're not punishing children anymore. Like those days are behind us. Punishing is not a part of our parenting repertoire anymore. And boundaries and consequences still exist in this world. And so, how do we look at parenting through the lens of cause and effect versus crime and punishment? And as soon as we start to talk about fault and blame and punishing and all of that stuff, it's just a sign that, we still have that default thinking and we all have it. My husband has it. I still have it, all of these things. I could give you 100 examples of times where I've fallen into this idea of like, oh, well, like for example, when Elijah was in treatment, River was having a really hard time, understandably. And he started behaving in ways that were absolutely unacceptable. And instead of disciplining him about those, I did the exact same thing. Well, it's because of what's going on with Elijah. Well, that is accurate. It was because of what was going on with Elijah. And the most important thing that River needed was for something to make sense in his world. And if all of a sudden something that was against the rules last week now is like acceptable this week, his world makes even less sense than it would if, yeah, crazy stuff's happening with his brother, but also last week and this week, it is not okay to skip your homework, for example. Right. So that's the other piece of this puzzle is like when we start to make excuses for our kids, when we start to excuse their behavior because we're looking at it through the lens of fault and blame and punishment and crime, we are doing a colossal disservice to them because when things are topsy turvy, that is when our kids need that consistent, predictable container more than ever. That kiddo with a brand new sibling needs it to be 90 minutes of screen time, just like it was last week. And bedtime's at 8:30, just like it was last week. And hitting and biting and scratching is against the rules, just like it was last week. And when you throw your dinner on the floor, dinner time is over, just like it was last week. That kiddo with a brand new sibling needs that. And in that transition regression time, it will be so much more short and straightforward and move through that space when the world makes sense to them. And it's the same thing with River. Like he needed the world to make sense because something crazy like his brother not living at home for a while because he was having such a hard time. If that can exist, well, my world makes no sense. So I'm going to start testing everything, right? And it's the same thing with Gigi. Oh my gosh, this new friend group and everything is new and exciting and different. And oh my God. And now, wait a second. Also, my curfew doesn't really exist anymore. And these are the kinds of like accidental confirmations of the world being topsy turvy and inexplicable that lead our children to do even more and more and more spiraling out of control behaviors. Instead of, it's amazing that you have these new friends. I'm so excited for the new things that you're doing with each other and the autonomy that you're experiencing, and you like being out of the house more and trying all these new things. Like all of it is incredible. And curfew still 10:30. The world still does make sense with this newness in it, if that makes sense. So be on to yourself about this. Like, how often are you really, really at the bottom line, maybe you're changing your words, but still in your mind, you think of discipline as crime and punishment, blame and fault. If that's the case for you, first of all, you're super normal. I've never met anybody who didn't need to work on making that shift in their minds, myself included. And second of all, you don't have to make that shift by yourself. And if you're not seeing the results you want, maybe you're implementing some of the stuff you've learned in this podcast, but you're not seeing the results you want. This might be the sneaky explanation for why that is. Because if your way of being, if your real like philosophy and view of parenting hasn't shifted, if your energy hasn't changed around discipline, just because you've changed your words and your actions, your way of being is going to be the thing that leaks out and has the most influence over what's going on in your family. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask for some support around this. It is very, very helpful, and no one should have to do this stuff alone. So I really encourage you to click on that link and set up that consultation that you hear me talk about every week. Give me a chance to help you make a true shift in your consciousness and in your mentality around disciplining your child, not just a semantic shift. And I cannot wait to talk to you. I can't wait to see you pop up into my calendar and my bookings. I can't wait to meet with you one-on-one and talk about your family. And in the meantime, I can't wait to talk to you again next week. Bye, everybody.
The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.